Welcome to Mother's Narrative Network. Before we begin, please like and subscribe for more daily uploads. Hope you enjoy today's video. Ghost Stories Part 3. Funnily enough, I believe I saw another one of my mum as a child. I was maybe 8 or so and woke up in the night to find the hall light on and my door wide open. Sat up feeling wide awake, as it was bright and I felt on edge for some reason. Looked back to see my mum had suddenly just appeared at the end of the hall. She walked down to her room and didn't turn off the light. Something was just so off. I called out a few times, no response, so I really started to call to them. I wanted to step off the bed, but I felt instinctively, do not do this. I called to them for maybe an hour with no response, becoming increasingly more fearful. And I was long past the age at night where I'd normally call to them unless there was severe issue. So they would have responded had they heard. I felt like that was not her I had seen. Seems like an odd thing to say as opposed to maybe they were just ignoring you, but I can't put into words the feeling of unease, of do not touch the floor I had. A cold feeling. A pure fear. The next day they said they never heard a thing. For all I know, maybe they were just shagging, but still, they would have responded at some point as I grew hysterical surely. I wonder now if it was a doppelganger thing. Or if I was somehow out of my own timeline briefly. Even if she'd been sleepwalking or something, which might explain leaving the hall light on, he would have responded. Just an odd thing I've always remembered from childhood. We talk about it sometimes now. Rationally it's easily explainable, but it felt off. Like a waking dream. But I know I was awake, because I stayed up for a long time debating whether or not to step off the bed, pacing my bed, sitting on it, calling out. Me, my DS7 and baby recently stayed in a very old cottage on holiday. First night, just after 3 a.m., I hear footsteps so prominent that I thought DS had woken up and was heading to our room. I opened the door, and he wasn't there, in fact he was still in bed. I went back to bed, the door gently opened ajar and then shut. Trying not to panic, I decided to dismiss it had happened and turned my back away from the door and went to sleep. The footsteps continued to happen the following nights at the same time, to the point where I opened the door, because I was sure someone was there. Last night, no footsteps, but the whole power went out. Restored 15 minutes later, the morning of departure, I have never been so eager to leave. Everything was shoved in cases, and I was practically dragging everyone outside. I then allowed myself to freak out, smiling face with open mouth and tightly closed eyes. DH decided to then tell me of the unexplained activity he saw too. Next holiday, we're staying at a Premier Inn. I am pretty open-minded and believe anything is possible, but it does make me laugh how so many stories of ghosts, demons, poltergeists, and ghouls are in really old, often large houses. And often in a remote or rural place. And they are nearly always Victorian or medieval ghosts. It's never a ghost with a One Direction t-shirt on, in a tiny 2013 new-built semi in the middle of Wolverhampton or Croydon. I have seen modern ones. But if I passed one in the supermarket, I wouldn't know, would I? Most houses on my street are 150 years plus old, and there are older things underground. A lot of streets in the UK are like this. It's a bit like cleaning. There is more ghost built up over time. Maybe. I guess there would be more chance of a ghost in older houses than there would in a 2013 house, as more people would have lived there. But it's just funny, to me, that people who claim to have seen a ghost nearly always say it's a house that's 100 plus years old, and it's always huge, and rambling with dozens of rooms, and sometimes multiple floors, and a cellar of course. And it's nearly always rural. It's never even 1960s, 1970s, or 1980s houses. And they would have had a good few people live in them, and people who had died since living there. Maybe it's reflecting Mumsnet users living more middle class, lives in Victorian semis and so on. I saw a deceased family member in a 1970s build house, but mistook him for a guest having a quiet moment in a side room, till he disappeared. It was a rambling house though, sorry. It was confusing because he looked familiar, but was someone I'd not met in his lifetime. I saw the ghost of Gloria Gaynor once. At first I was afraid, I was petrified. I've had lots of weird experiences, but one of them when I was a child about 10, and I got an old china doll as a gift. I collected little dolls and the others looked pretty, but this one creeped me out. I had them sitting on a shelf, but they were facing away from the position of my bed. Every morning I woke up and the creepy doll would be facing me, it had turned round. I kept putting it back, but each morning it was facing me. I thought maybe someone in the family might be pranking me. That was until one day I was in the room alone with it. I was looking at it and got such an uneasy feeling. I grabbed it, wrapped it in an old top, and turned it face down. I turned to leave my room when I heard a strange whooshing noise. I immediately turned back to look at the doll. It was unraveled from the top and glaring at me. I got rid of it that day. Still spooks me out when I think about it. Both of the odd houses that I lived in that had something were newer houses. The first was an early 1970s semi that had an oppressive feel about it. My parents had a carved stone ashtray, despite being non-smokers, on top of the television in the lounge. There would sometimes be a heavy smell of cigar smoke and then ash would appear in the ashtray. No one smoked in our house and we'd had no visitors, but the atmosphere would feel edgy and dark. I spent a lot of time outside of the house, because I hated it, but I would sometimes see a sort of dark vision, or impression that looked like a large man holding a cigar. The other was a 1990s semi. We'd only been moved in for a few months when I saw Ned for the first time. We had a long room on the ground floor that was a lounge at front and diner at the back, that stretched from front to back garden with sliding patio doors out to the garden, and the stairs were near the front door, open to the lounge end. One afternoon I walked down the stairs, and when I got to the bottom and turned towards the diner end as the kitchen was off the diner. Stood in the diner in front of the doors was a man dressed in a yellow fisherman's sou'wester type coat with matching trousers. He was dripping wet and had the hood up hiding his face, but I felt overwhelming sadness from him. He just stood completely still, and I think that I said, "Oh, hello." I stared at him for a minute or so and looked away to check the time for 1 second. School pickup time was due, and when I looked at him again, he was gone, just vanished. I regularly saw him every few months under the exact same circumstances. It was always afternoons, and he was in the exact same spot looking the same. In the end I called him Ned. On afternoons when he appeared I would say, "Hello Ned, I wish you could find your peace," and I would gaze at him for a minute or so and then deliberately look away. When I looked back, he was always gone, leaving no trace of his having been there. I have told this story on MN before, and also told loads of people, so probably outing. Years ago I worked with adults with LD, in a unit that was opposite the site of an old psychiatric hospital. One day I was taking one of our residents for a walk in the old grounds opposite, and there was a figure in a long black hooded coat a few meters ahead of us. The resident I was with mainly non-verbal, but used to shout out random sounds. Every time he shouted, the figure ahead of us stopped for a few seconds, but kept facing forward. This happened about 5 or 6 times, then when it stopped it turned around to face us. Well, actually it didn't really have a face as such, it was like a sort of head, but had no features. It scared the bejesus out of me, so I grabbed the resident's hand and fled back to the unit. I honestly thought I had seen the Grim Reaper. I did not tell anyone back at work, because I thought they would book me into the mental health unit next door. The resident I was with would have been unable to communicate what we saw to back me up. Months later, when we were taking some residents on the same walk, a new member of staff said she wondered if there were ghosts around, because of all the patients who had died in the hospital. I only then felt brave enough to recount my story. Word soon got around back at the unit, and people were intrigued, rather than doubting me. A few days later a colleague said that she had started to tell the story to her daughter, who had worked at the physiatric hospital years before. When she got to the part of the figure turning around, her daughter interrupted and said, "I bet she didn't have a face." It turned out that the daughter had encountered the faceless figure about 10 years previously, but had also not told anyone, in case they thought she was imagining things. Name change to post this, as spoken to several people IRL about a couple of things. I live in a post-war ex-council semi. Never had any bad feelings here, and I do get strange feelings in some houses. However, several years ago, I had a couple of days where I just felt off, like someone was watching me all the time. One of these days, when I was home alone, mid-morning, DS had left a remote control car on the coffee table, and I suddenly noticed the aerial on the controller bouncing from side to side, like someone had pinged it with their finger. I was sat watching it, trying to work out what could have caused it, when the car itself started up and shot forwards off the table and across the room. The next day, again, home alone, I heard this god-awful kind of static noise, so got up to see where it was coming from. DS's wireless amp in his bedroom had turned itself on and was making that horrid noise amps make when nothing is plugged into them. The switch on the back is a very solid rocker-type switch, and I could not get it to sit halfway, or anything, so couldn't work out how on earth it had switched on. The uneasy feeling lasted about another day, then everything felt normal again, and has done since. Another weird one was a couple of years ago, when I was sat at 11:37 a.m. having a cuppa, again completely alone, and I suddenly heard my mum's voice as clear as day saying, "Oh hi Jean." Mum has been dead since 2009, but it was unmistakably her voice. Jean was a good friend of my mum's and Jay had heard from her in a while. So I started Googling, only to find Jean had died recently and her funeral had started at 11:30 a.m. That freaked me out more than a bit. I'm going back about 17-18 years here, but someone bought my Didi a China doll that stood on a stand and was wearing a foul green lacy dress, and bonnet the type you'd win at bingo. I hated that doll, it had such an evil vibe. I swear her eyes used to follow me round her bedroom and I'd hear voices in my head if I got too close to her. Anyway, we were moving house, so the kids had gone off with their grandparents, while my friend and I moved our stuff to the new house. It's rotten to admit, but that doll creeped me out so badly. I wrapped her in newspaper and dumped her in the old house bin. Got to our new house, unpacked most of our stuff, and left the few remaining boxes for the next morning. Woke up and there was that blasted doll next to DD's bed. I tried to get rid of it over the next few years, but it always seemed to come back. My friend swore she hadn't fished her out of the bin, and she's known for being very honest. I'd sat with her in the van, and I would have seen it. A few years later, it just disappeared. Didi swears she didn't been it, was there when she went to school and gone when she got back. I'd been at college all day and her siblings at school, so nobody was at home all day. Can't say I was too upset about it. I've never felt such evil. That's a very creepy story. Got shivers and goosebumps all over my body. I think there may be something attached to them, or someone has put a spell. It can sound like crap, but I know exactly what happened to me was 100% real. Very spooky. I wonder where your creepy doll is now. When I said I got rid, I never binned mine, just gave it to a relative. I think of it now and then and it creeps MW out. These things are very real. There is an area near to me where the houses are very old. I once saw a man there, dressed in Napoleonic War uniform. I remember seeing him walking in a very purposeful way with an expression I can't quite describe. I was really fascinated as why he'd be dressed like that and where he was going. There was nothing going on nearby, which could explain the uniform, and I remember thinking how authentic it looked. I then started to think maybe I was seeing a ghost. There was something about him which didn't add up when I thought about it logically. My grandparents and my mum and aunts moved to a house in a wood. Many times, at a certain time of day, a door would slam and footsteps would cross the floor, but nobody was there. They got used to it. In the house they lived in before that one, nothing unusual happened, but I recently was in touch with a lady on a Facebook local history page who lived in that house. She said all the time she and her family lived there, weird things happened like voices when nobody else was in, footsteps walking upstairs, but nobody was there and things going missing all the time. Whatever was there must have been attached to her family, as my family experienced nothing spooky there. Thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed the video. Before you go please, like, comment, and subscribe for more daily uploads.